What's up, everyone? My name is Drew Tucker. I am the director of the Jazz Road program here at South Arts, and we want to welcome you here to our Creative Residencies webinar. So when it comes to grant opportunities, Jazz Road has two distinct grant opportunities that are available to US-based jazz artists. The first is the Creative Residency Grants, which we're here to discuss today, and the other one is the Tour Support Grants. Tour Support Grants offer awards from $5,000 up to $15,000, and the Creative Residency Grants are from $5,000 up to $40,000. So the Jazz Road Creative Residency Grant Program is part of a national Jazz Road initiative. It's funded by the Doris Duke Foundation with support from the Mellon Foundation. And the purpose is to support US-based jazz artists in creative exploration and community engagement. And again, that grant opportunity ranges from $5,000 up to $40,000. The purpose and goals of the Creative Residency Program, number one, is to advance artistry and creative exploration. Number two, it's to foster deep community connections. And number three, it's to push the jazz field forward. Here's some important key dates and timelines. The applications are open now. They opened on the 15th of January. The deadline is the 2nd of April at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Awarded applicants will be notified on the 30th of June in 2025. And the residency period, so the time that your residency must be take place during, is between July 1st, 2025 to June 30th, 2026. So who can apply? Well, professional jazz artists, solo or ensemble leaders. Artists who can apply must be U.S. citizens or permanent residents, and they cannot be previous Creative Residencies grantees. You can be a previous Jazz Road Tour grantee, but you can't be a previous Creative Residency grantee. So who cannot apply? What that means is that anyone who's a student, any artists who are currently enrolled in school full-time are not eligible to apply. Anybody who's a non-U.S. resident, so applicants who are not U.S. citizens or permanent residents or green card holders are not eligible to apply. Although non-residents may participate in projects, but they cannot be paid with Jazz Road funds. Anybody who was previously awarded a Creative Residency grant is not eligible to apply. So artists who have previously received Jazz Road Creative Residencies funding, again, are not eligible. Any university-sponsored projects, so projects tied to an institution, unless the lead applicant is an independent artist that's affiliated with the institution. So what that means is that an institution cannot just apply to get enhance their sheet music for their university jazz band. And also early career artists, so any applicants who don't fall within the program's intended spectrum of mid-career to more accomplished professional artists. All right, here's some of the residency requirements. The duration is 1 to 4 weeks. This does not have to be a continuous 1 to 4 weeks. It could be 1 week in August, 1 week in September, another week in December, and another week in June. If that's how your project wants to shape up, it could be a few days here, a few days in another month, a few days in another location. However, you want to plan your project that's best for you to be successful and to be able to complete it and to come out with the objectives that you intend to. That's how you can shape it. Where can the location be? Anywhere in the U.S. That includes the territories. And the structure of the projects can be included but not limited to solo works, cross-disciplinary collaborations, community engagements, and there's a lot more. So make sure you guys go check out jazzroad.org to check out all the eligibility guidelines for a more comprehensive list of different examples of types of projects that you can apply with. So the application process has some 3 key steps. You want to prepare your project narrative, your budget, and supporting documents. That's why you're here for this webinar, to help you be able to do that. And then you want to go ahead and submit via the Salesforce portal, which you can find by going to jazzroad.org, click on Creative Residencies, and when you're ready to submit your application, you'll set up your account in the Salesforce portal, and then you'll go ahead and be able to start your application, save it, go back when you need to. It's really important, though, that when you are setting up your account in the Salesforce portal, that you set it up as an individual. Because if you set it up as an organization, you won't be able to find or have access to any of the Jazz Road grants, as they are individual artist grants. So if you've already done that, you've already gone in, you've already set it up as an organization, make sure you reach out to us so that we can go ahead and help you with that technical issue. And all the contact information, if you don't already have it, is available at jazzroad.org and will also be available at the conclusion of this webinar. So, good example of someone who followed the key steps of the application process is someone who submitted an early submission with all the completed documents uploaded. A bad example would be a last-minute submission with missing or vague materials. We are going to have a lot of good examples and bad examples as we go through it to really try to give you as much information as possible to help you be as successful as possible. All right. 3 key areas for a competitive application. So to create a strong application, your project should ideally address 3 key areas. It should have significant and positive career impact. That means that the project should propel your career forward with measurable outcomes. So there could be new work, collaborations, professional visibility. Maybe there's a different aspect of the creative work that you want to get into. So if you're primarily an artist, but you've been really successful in the past at promoting shows, maybe this is an opportunity for you to flex your presenter muscles and maybe put on a concert so it might be able to present you in a new light and maybe give you a kickstart to that part of your career that you might not have been able to do prior. So significant positive career impact, that's number 1. Number 2 is you want to bring people and communities together. So you want to foster meaningful connections and provide community engagement opportunities through the project. So an example of that could be workshops, public events, cultural exchange. All of these things, if they're incorporated into your project, can help show that you are doing that, which is bringing people and communities together. And then last but definitely not least is you want to do what you can to have a positive impact on the jazz field in the US. So that means that the project should contribute in some way to the evolution and growth of jazz. So that could be, for example, through innovation, through mentorship, through expanding access to jazz, through adding new works to the lexicon, things such as that. All right, so now we're going to go through some example project ideas. Here's some good and not so good examples of project ideas, and I didn't use the term bad project ideas because these are just sort of the seeds of ideas, and so if they're fleshed out, there is a chance that some of the ones that are not so good could turn into good project ideas, but you kind of have an uphill battle with some of them, so to speak. So we'll get right into them, and again, these are just examples, simple examples, and we're going to get more in depth as we go along. So a good idea. A jazz quartet creates a suite inspired by local stories, collaborating with community leaders and elders. Not so good. A jazz pianist plans a 4-week secluded residency to compose and record a solo album. Good. A 3-week hybrid residency in a rural town, combining composition and public workshops, culminating in a public concert and a live recording. Not so good. A residency at a university teaching the big band for 1 week. Here's another good one. There's a residency in conjunction with a research company that looks to see the effects of improvisation on certain neurodivergent populations with a recording of the ensemble along with the participants at the conclusion. Not so good as the jazz quartet hosts a series of free outdoor concerts and jam sessions in their hometown. And then good here, we have the commissioning of a real book of jazz tunes by female composers that culminates in an album with an all-girl combo. This combo also plans to tour middle and high schools to enhance participations from girls in jazz. And not so good, making a new album of songs that she wrote. So it's important to note that the strongest projects address all 3 of those areas. They build your career, they bring communities together, and they push the jazz field. But a project can still be competitive if it's exceptionally strong in one area and then still reasonably addresses the others. So now we'll talk about when ideas fall short. Here are a few examples of projects that have an imbalance. Maybe they're strong in one area, but deficient in the others. So the first one we'll talk about is a project that is career impact focused. And this is without advancing the jazz field or connecting communities. So here's the example. A jazz pianist plans a 4-week secluded residency to compose and record a solo album. So this is good for the artist because it gives the artist some space and some time to be able to create music, record an album, and improves the artist's visibility and catalog with a new body of work. But how could the project be better? Well, the project does lack community engagement and it doesn't push the jazz field forward. So while this would be a challenge, you could find ways to improve on this program by adding outreach events like workshops or Q&A sessions to strengthen the community impact. And instead of making the album the sole focus of the residency, the album could be a deliverable of a project that maybe is more community-minded or a jazz field building project. So the next one we want to look at is a project that addresses community impact, but it doesn't do much to advance the jazz field. And so here's an example. A jazz quartet hosts a series of free outdoor concerts and jam sessions in their hometown. This is one of the ideas we spoke about earlier. And so what's good about this is conceivably it could build community and engagement and local excitement for jazz, but how could it be better? Well, this program likely wouldn't produce new work based on the way it's presented. It doesn't really have any artistic innovation or contribute to broader discussions in the jazz world or add any new music to the lexicon. So one way that this artist could improve it is by incorporating creative exploration, maybe composing a piece inspired by the community stories to ensure the project contributes to maybe the broader jazz landscape. And so the next one is a cautionary tale, because many people will say, well, won't any project we do naturally just enhance our career? And in the large part, this is true, but here's a way that a project could be great for the community, great for the jazz field, but harmful for your career. So here's an example of a great project. Sounds great, right? A lead artist proposes a residency to host an extensive series of free workshops across underserved communities, building strong community connections. At the end of it, they're going to create a groundbreaking multidisciplinary performance that fuses jazz and spoken word and local history, all contributing to the evolution of the jazz field. All of this sounds great, but what's the problem? Well, in this scenario, the artist underestimates the time and resources that are needed to execute the project. They dedicate more hours than budgeted for, they forego their artist fee to cover project costs, and the result is that the project is completed, but it strains their personal finances and limits their ability to scale or focus on future growth. So how can we avoid that? How can you avoid sacrificing yourself for the project? Well, number one, make sure you budget realistically. Ensure that your compensation reflects your work and the hours that you're putting in and aligns with the industry standards. Number two, you want to avoid self-sacrifice. We're all extremely passionate about this art form, about what we do, but a strong project should support your career, not hinder it. And number three, you want to think sustainability. Consider long-term impacts. If your role isn't sustainable, future opportunities may be harder to pursue. So you want to make sure that this is a project that can have legs and have greater meaning beyond just the scope of your residency. So here are some tips for strengthening your application to make sure that you're showing that you're filling all three buckets with your project. Add community elements, so include outreach or public events or collaborations. A way to show that you're pushing the jazz field is by incorporating innovative elements, experimentation, documentation that could help others, and or mentorship, something that provides something that the next generation of jazz artists will use to help keep the jazz field strong. And also you want to have some balance. Your project doesn't need to address all three areas equally, but it should substantially address all of them to some extent. And so if you're unsure, the best thing to do is to ask, how would this residency benefit others outside of myself? All right, so let's take a look at the review criteria. This is the criteria that the panel is going to use to adjudicate the projects. So we have four different categories here. There's artistic excellence, and the way that we communicate artistic excellence is primarily through work samples. There's the residency components, that's the project, and that's going to be communicated through the narratives that you're asked to write and through the budget. The residency outcomes, which are going to be communicated through the narratives and the outcome narrative, and then the capacity to complete the residency project. This is going to be communicated through your work samples, through your commitment from partner organizations and other partner artists, and of course your budget as well. All right, so here's an example of a great project that has the potential to make a real impact and hits all of the key outcomes to be highly competitive. However, having the great project idea is only half the battle. Using this project example, we're going to discuss how to show your artistic excellence, clearly communicate your project components and outcomes, and show that you have the capacity to follow through. So the example that we're going to use is Voices of the Delta, a jazz suite inspired by Southern history. The description is that the artist proposes a residency to compose and premiere a multi-movement jazz suite inspired by the cultural and historical richness of the Mississippi Delta. The project will feature collaboration with local poets and historians, culminating in a public performance and a recording of the suite. And so the project outcomes are that it's going to enhance the jazz field by providing this new body of work, Voices of the Delta, this jazz suite. And it's going to strengthen community because it's going to have a series of community engagement workshops exploring the history and music of the Delta. It's going to incorporate stories into the new work, and it's going to build the artist's career because at the end of it, there will be a recorded performance of the suite for digital distribution. All right, so we see that we got a great project idea, has great bones, but having the great project idea is only half the battle. The other part is the challenge of making sure that we are able to communicate how effective our project will be in reaching your goals and the funder's goals. So we're going to take each of those adjudication criteria one by one, artistic excellence, the project narrative, the outcomes, and the capacity. And we're going to talk about using this project, how you can show that you'll be able to achieve all of those goals to the highest of your ability. The first one is how to show artistic excellence. And so this is going to be, as we spoke about, is exemplified in your work samples, and the work samples that you submit should be reflective of the proposed project. So if you have collaborators, there should be work samples that show evidence of the collaborators' expertise in the area that they're contributing to the project. So we're going to talk about how to do that. The project title is Voices of the Delta, a jazz suite inspired by Southern history. And so here's some examples of weak or irrelevant artistic work samples using in this project. So here's sample one. recordings of the artist quartet playing jazz standards. Why is it weak? Well, they may be great recordings and they may demonstrate technical proficiency and ensemble cohesion, but they don't showcase the artist's ability to compose original music, which is central focus to the proposed project. And what's the relevancy issue? Well, the project is about creating a new jazz suite. It's about composition, and it's about Southern history. Performing existing standards doesn't demonstrate the creativity or storytelling that's required to deliver on this vision. Here's another one. Videos of solo improvisations on a well-known jazz tune. Why is this a weak sample to submit? Well, the solo improvisation may highlight the artist's technical skill and fluency in the jazz language, but it doesn't reflect their ability to compose or collaborate, which are key aspects of the proposed project. And why does it have a relevancy issue? Well, the project involves a multi-movement composition and collaboration with poets and historians. So a video of solo improvisation doesn't demonstrate your readiness for that scope of work. Here's another one. A recording of a pop or funk cover by the artist band. So why is this work sample not a good one to submit? Well, it's weak because it might show versatility. Performing pop or funk covers is irrelevant to the specific artistic outcomes of composing a historically inspired jazz suite. The relevancy issue is that the proposal is rooted in jazz composition and cultural exploration. So a recording of non-jazz material, no matter how good it is, distracts from and undermines the artist's credibility in the jazz field. And we have one more. A recording of unrelated non-musical collaboration with visual artists. So yes, you're showing that you can collaborate, but why is this weak? Well, while it may showcase the artist's ability to collaborate, if it doesn't involve music or similar multidisciplinary focus, it will fail to connect to the project's outcomes. What's the relevancy issue? Well, the proposed project involves blending jazz and spoken word in history, so a collaboration with a visual artist does not demonstrate the specific skills or outcomes relevant to this residency. So what are some examples of some strong and relevant work samples? Well, recordings of the artist's original compositions in a similar style to the proposed suite. Excerpts from a prior collaborative work with poets or historians. So an example is a previous project blending spoken word and jazz. A video of a live performance showcasing the artist's compositional and improvisational skills. Or work samples from the proposed poets. And so why is this strong? Well, the samples directly showcase the artist's ability to deliver high-quality original compositions. And it also demonstrates your experience with collaborative multidisciplinary projects. And it shows the collaborator's ability to fill in the gaps the lead artist may have in performing poetry. So key takeaways. Weak work samples fail because they don't align. And so they don't align with the project goals. They don't reflect the artistic or collaborative elements that are central to the proposal. They don't demonstrate key skills. They fail to show the artist's ability to compose, innovate, or collaborate in a way that directly connects to project outcomes. They distract, so they distract from the narratives. Irrelevant samples may confuse reviewers and make the application seem unfocused or poorly prepared, and they're unfocused. So for a project like Voices of the Delta, strong work samples should focus on original compositions, relevant collaborations, and performances that reflect the artist's ability to achieve the project goals. All right, so now we're talking about the residency components. How do you communicate your project? The project narrative. Number one, you want to explain your project thoroughly. Clearly describe what your project is and what you plan to do, and include all necessary details and logistics to avoid ambiguity. Number two, you want to help the panel to understand. The more detailed you are, the easier it will be for the panel to visualize and evaluate your project. Aim to leave the panel with few questions as possible. And here's a pro tip, ask someone with no artistic background to review your narrative. If they understand it, you're likely on the right track, and if they're totally confused, then you want to adjust your narrative accordingly. Now, this doesn't mean that someone with no musical experience or experience in jazz needs to understand fully, but a non-musician or someone who doesn't have the relevant experience should still understand what you're trying to accomplish, not necessarily because the project is simple, but because you're communicating it in a way that makes it clear and easy for the reader to understand. Focus on making complicated ideas sound simple. So let's compare a weak project narrative versus a strong project narrative. Again, we're using the same project, Voices of the Delta, a jazz suite inspired by Southern history. And so here's an example of a weak project narrative. During this residency, I will travel to the Mississippi Delta to create music inspired by the region's history. I plan to visit key locations, learn about the area's culture, and use this experience as inspiration to write a series of new jazz compositions. I will also collaborate with local artists and give a performance to share the music I create. The project will rely on support from the local community, but specific details about partners or resources haven't been finalized yet. So why is it weak? Well, it has vague timelines. There's really no clear understanding of when the project will take place, or even an understanding that you as the artist even understand how long it will take. There's a lack of deliverables. Write a series of new jazz compositions, and the idea of sharing it with the community are not clear enough outcomes for a successful project. Capacity. Well, this narrative uses a general timeline with no details about how resources, logistics, or activities will be executed, and that leaves room for confusion. And then feasibility. The narrative fails to show that the project is realistic and well thought out. The resources and partners needed are not understood or communicated. So what's an example of a good project narrative? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here's one. Again, same project. And here's the difference. So remember, the project, this Voices of the Delta, this new jazz suite, is a great project. It has great ideas, has great bones, but the former narrative didn't communicate in a way that helped the panel to understand and be clear that the artists submitting it really had a clear understanding of it and was going to be able to achieve it. So here's a good project narrative, same project. This residency will focus on the creation of a multi-movement jazz suite inspired by the cultural and historical narratives of the Mississippi Delta. Week 1 will involve in-depth research, including interviews with local community members to gather stories and themes, which will inform the compositions. During Week 2, I will begin composing the suite, collaborating with local poets to integrate spoken word elements into the music. Week 3 will include 2 community workshops where participants can engage with the creative process, offering insights and feedback on the developing work. And finally, Week 4 will culminate in a live performance of the completed suite at the Delta Cultural Center, supported by a professional recording team to document the performance for future use. This project will require access to a rehearsal space, audio recording equipment, and support from local organizations to facilitate community engagement and outreach. This would go on, of course, to elaborate on how the artist will procure these resources and collaborate with the partners to acquire them. And each of those weeks were cut short for brevity, but optimally you would expand on what that would mean, what it would mean to interview with local community members, how you'd go about finding them, why these particular local community members would be important to your project. Week 2 would talk about composing the suite and talking about collaborating with local poets and talking about how you integrate that into the music, hopefully more detail about what that process would look like. And Week 3, with the community workshops, you would talk about where those would be, how you would identify the proper places, what tools you use to identify spaces that would be able to host these workshops to make sure that they would have the most impact. So why this good narrative is better? Well, there's clear timelines. The narrative gives a week-by-week breakdown of activities, demonstrating careful planning. There's specific deliverables. It specifies how each week will be used, ensuring the panel can visualize the process. It's extremely detailed. The narrative uses a specific timeline with details about how resources, logistics, and activities will be executed, leaving the panel with a sense of clarity as opposed to a lot of questions. And then the feasibility or the capacity. This narrative shows that the project is realistic and well thought out. The resources and partners needed are understood and communicated. All right, so now we're going to get into residency outcomes. How to communicate that you know exactly the impact you want your project to have. You want to make sure you define your desired outcomes for a sharper project focus. Here's some tips. You want to keep the funder's priorities in mind. You want to be clear and concise, and you want to relate everything back to those 3 buckets: moving the jazz field forward, connecting communities, and building career. So here's an example of a subpar project narrative. Again, we're still using the same project about Voices of the Delta. And so it says here that the project aims to write some new music inspired by the Mississippi Delta's rich cultural and historical legacy. Through a residency, the artist plans to share this music with the local community during a live performance, creating an opportunity for engagement and connection. Additionally, the project seeks to highlight how jazz connects with history and demonstrate its relevance in a modern context, showing audiences how vibrant and cool jazz can be. So let's break it down. The artistic outcome, how did it bring forward the artistic outcome in that narrative? Well, it basically said that they were going to write some new music inspired by the Delta. And what about community outcome? Share my music with local community during a performance. And field impact, to show people how cool jazz is and how it connects with history. So why does this miss the mark? Well, it's vague, it lacks specificity. It doesn't explain measurable or tangible benefits. and it fails to demonstrate any lasting impact for the artist, for the community, or the jazz field. Again, this project has all the elements. It's a wonderful project that can easily meet all three of the intended goals. But the question and what we're tackling here is, are we communicating it correctly? So that's what we hope to address with this webinar. So here's an example of a good way to communicate outcomes. The project aims to create a multi-movement jazz suite inspired by stories gathered from community interviews, blending jazz and spoken word into a professionally recorded performance. By incorporating local narratives, the project seeks to strengthen intergenerational ties through 2 public workshops, engaging participants in the creative process and fostering cultural appreciation. Additionally, the project strives to innovate the jazz genre by merging historical narratives with modern jazz composition, culminating in a publicly accessible recording to showcase the work nationwide. So let's break it down. Do you see what it mentioned there when it came to artistic outcome? It said, create a multi-movement jazz suite inspired by stories gathered from community interviews, blending jazz and spoken word in a professionally recorded performance. When it came to community outcome, it said it wanted to strengthen intergenerational ties by incorporating local stories and hosting 2 public workshops, engaging participants in the creative process and fostering cultural appreciation. And it showed field impact by saying the project was going to innovate the jazz genre by merging historical narratives with modern jazz composition, producing a publicly accessible recording to showcase the project nationwide. So here's the key takeaways. When you're trying to define outcomes, you want to be specific. Clearly define your measurable outcomes. You want to keep the funder's priorities in mind. Clearly demonstrate how the project advances your career and it contributes to community, and innovation and growth of the jazz field. You want to make sure you show the impact. Describe how the project will benefit your career, the community, and the jazz field. You want to think long-term, include outcomes that extend beyond the residency, such as public recordings or strengthen networks, etc. And you want to avoid generalities. Avoid vague statements like, I want to share my music or just connect with people, but instead provide detailed, actionable, and measurable goals. So now we're going to get into capacity. And this is helping the panel to answer the question of whether you'll be able to accomplish what you set out to do. And so how are you showing your ability to execute your plan? There are a lot of artists who will assume that because they have a vast resume and a very impressive bio, that should be enough to show that they will be able to accomplish the project as presented. But it's not. There's more to it than just your past work. If your project is something that is really attempting to push your skills or something you've dreamed about for a long time or it's something you're really trying to do, there's a good chance that a lot of your past work won't necessarily reflect that. If the project is just an extension of something you've already done, well, then it should be no problem with the relevant work samples to show that you have the expertise needed to pull it off. So that's the question. Have you shown in this application, not in all of your past work, but in this application, through the work samples you presented, have you shown that you have the knowledge base and resources to see your project all the way through to completion? And do your work samples show that expertise? And have you shown the capacity of your collaborators to fill in any gaps that you may have in completing your project? So an application that shows the artist has the capacity to accomplish the project, again, we're using Voices of the Delta, this jazz suite composition. Knowledge base. The artist provides evidence of prior work that integrates community storytelling with jazz composition, including a previous project maybe where they collaborated with local historians to create a suite that was inspired by cultural landmarks, for example. And even if you don't have something that's that specific, something that does show that you have the fundamental skill or capacity to be able to do the thing that you're saying you're going to do. And they describe their familiarity with the Mississippi Delta's history that's gained through personal research and prior residencies maybe in similar regions. Those are some ways to show that you have the knowledge base to pull it off. Now, if you don't have the knowledge base, and we'll talk about that this in a little bit when we get down to collaborators, but if you don't have the knowledge base, do you have the collaborators and have you shown the collaborators' level of expertise that shows confidently that they'll be able to fill in the gaps of any knowledge base or expertise that you may have? What about when it comes to resources? The artist outlines secured access to a dedicated rehearsal and recording space, provided in partnership with the Delta Cultural Center, for example. They've allocated a portion of the budget for professional recording equipment and engineers to document the final performance. Work samples. Well, their work samples would include recordings of original compositions that showcase the artist's ability to blend jazz with these narrative elements, demonstrating their expertise in innovative composition. And there will be additional samples that highlight past collaborations with similar artists, in this case, spoken word artists and community members, that underscore their ability to integrate multiple art forms. And again, to the collaborators, the artist has partnered with a local poet and historian to support the project's narrative and spoken word elements. A community engagement coordinator from the Delta Cultural Center is included to help organize and promote workshops and ensure meaningful community participation. And clear planning. The application includes a detailed timeline with milestones for research, composition, workshops, and the final performance. And the artist provides a budget that reflects realistic costs for resources and collaborators, demonstrating strong financial planning skills. So the key takeaways from this, you want to make sure that you show that you have a proven track record of creating similar multidisciplinary projects. Again, we're talking about this specific Delta project as an example. You want to show that the resources are already secured or that you have a clear plan to acquire them, and this will reduce risks to your project completion. You want to show how collaborators can fill the gaps in your expertise, ensuring the project benefits from diverse perspectives and skills. And you want to make sure your work samples directly align with the project's goals, building confidence in the artist's ability to deliver high quality outcomes. So thank you guys very much. Now we're going to turn it over to my assistant director, Eric, who's going to talk about the budget template, and how to craft a successful budget.
Hey everybody, I'm Eric Rucker, the Assistant Director of Jazz at South Arts, and today I'm going to walk you through how to complete your budget for the Jazz Road Creative Residency grant. I want you to think of this video as your guide to creating a clear, detailed, and realistic budget that will set you up for success. All right, so let's dive in. The budget section is not just about numbers. It's also a great exercise in thinking through all of the costs tied to your project. A clear, realistic budget helps the panel understand exactly what you need to bring your vision to life. It will also factor into the strength of your application by supporting your project narrative and demonstrating your capacity to successfully complete the project. One of the biggest things to keep in mind is clarity. You want to be as specific as possible to ensure that your budget accurately reflects your project. Also, make sure your numbers align with typical rates for the location where your residency will take place. For this entire walkthrough, we're going to continue using the Voices of Delta project as our example. The template is linked directly in the application and can also be found on the Jazz Road Creative Residency Frequently Asked Questions page. It's compatible with any spreadsheet program that includes Google Sheets, Apple Numbers, or Microsoft Excel. When you first open the budget template, the first thing you see is the Overview tab. Do not type anything on this page. This sheet will automatically pull numbers from the rest of your budget and give a quick summary of your total expenses at the end. So we'll come back to this at the end to check our final numbers. So down along the bottom, you're going to see all these different tabs within this spreadsheet. Our first tab is Artist and Artistic Collaborator. This section is where you will outline compensation for your creative team and explain what they bring to the project. For example, in Voices of the Delta, Nancy Henson is the composer, arranger, and bandleader, writing 6 pieces for the project. Bernard Smith is our lyricist, collaborating with Nancy on lyrics and spoken word elements. One important note, this is not where you include artist fees. Those will go under the engagement expenses, which we'll cover later. Our next tab is lodging. This section covers housing costs for you, your artists, and any collaborators. This could include hotels, Airbnbs, or other lodging options. Think about everyone who will need a place to stay during the residency. And don't forget your technical team. In this example, we budgeted to house the audio-visual crew. Be sure to fill out all the fields so the sheet calculates everything correctly. Our next tab is Engagement Expenses. This is where you list payments for professionals like musicians, any other guest artists, and also any associated venue costs. One key tip is to be as clear as possible in the service and description columns. The more detail that you can provide, the stronger your application will be. In our example here, our section includes facility rental fees as well as musicians' payments. Our next tab is Transportation Costs. This tab covers all travel expenses, flights, car rentals, gas, ride shares, trains, etc. In our example, we budgeted for ride shares from the airport to the rental car location, plus a 4-day car rental for local transportation. We also estimated all the fuel costs and included them here. Our next tab we're going to explore is our production costs. Here's where you add expenses for anything production related. This could be audio engineers, videographers, any backline that you need to rent, and lighting. In Voices of the Delta, we're hiring a recording engineer and also bringing in 2 other individuals, Troy Benson and James Mitchell, to provide backline and lighting. Remember, you can work with companies or hire trusted individuals. It's whatever makes the most sense for your project. Our next tab is marketing, and this is where any costs associated with marketing will go. In our example, we budgeted for a printed banner, a local promoter, and we purchased some social media ads. If you're planning to print flyers, run an ad campaign, or hire anybody for PR, this is the place to include all of those expenses. Now, sometimes you may have expenses that may not fit into any of these buckets, and that's what you will include in the Other Expenses tab. In this example, we included catering and some child care costs. So any unique expenses that your project may have, this is where they should live. Having a partner organization is optional for the Jazz Road Creative Residencies, but if you have one providing any kind of financial support, this is where you should list it. In our example, 2 partner organizations are contributing a combined $10,000 towards this project. Our final tab is the Other Income. This section includes any estimated income that will help fund your project, like ticket sales, merchandise, or any kind of donations. For our Voices of the Delta project, we estimated selling 125 tickets to our final concert. And since the venue seats 350, this felt like a realistic number that we could count on. Now that all of our numbers are inputted into the budget, we can revisit that first Overview tab. You'll see now that all of the totals have been updated. Our total expenses came to $50,202.69, which is over the maximum request of $40,000 for the Creative Residency Grant. But since our partner organizations contributed $10,000, and we estimate $1,250 in ticket sales, our final request comes to $38,952.69 within the allowed limit. Now, inside of your Salesforce application, when it asks you for the amount requested, that is the number you should put in that box. A well-organized budget makes your application stronger and helps the panel clearly see how your project will come together. Remember, if you have any questions at all, check out our frequently asked questions page or reach out. We want to see your project succeed. Thanks for joining me, and good luck with your application.
So here's just a few final thoughts and reminders. You want to make sure that you compose your narratives on another document and then copy and paste them into your application when you're ready. Double check your documents before submitting, use industry standard fees, and reach out early if you need help. A note on industry standard fees, what that means is perhaps you live in maybe a rural area or an area where fees are a certain amount and you want your project to take place in a different area, say maybe somewhere like San Francisco. You'd want to do research, maybe call artists over there, reach out to any artists you might be able to find out what the standard fees in that area are, especially if you're going to be using artists from that area. Sometimes in certain areas, the fees may be way lower than in certain more coastal areas or more metropolitan areas. So we just want to make sure we're using those industry standard fees so that you can have a realistic understanding of what it's going to cost you to complete your project. And so I just want to thank you so much for your interest in Jazz Road programs. We're excited to see your creative vision. Feel free to reach out to us. Contact information will be available at the end of the program. So thank you guys very much.